Week 1 of the 2025 NFL season is swiftly approaching. You guys have drafted your fantasy teams, but who are the players that you need to target out there on the waiver wire right now before Week 1's official kickoff? Let's break down the top wide receivers and running backs I think you guys need to run to the waiver wire to add before Week 1 is here. All right, let's kick the video off with Thornton of the Raiders, coming in at 29% rostered on the Sleeper app. And it's a pretty good matchup against the New England Patriots in Week 1, who allowed the 18th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers last year, and ultimately were one of the worst defenses in the NFL. So, what do we think about Thornton? Because today we did see the addition of Amari Cooper to this wide receiver room. We also saw the potential for a trade from the wide receiver one on this team in Jakobi Meyers. And what does all this mean for Thornton? Well, only time will tell. At the time of recording this, we don't even know if truly we're going to see a trade from the Raiders and if we're going to see Jakobi Meyers actually traded, right? We don't really know what Amari Cooper's role is here. And I mean, if last year was any tale, I mean, Amari Cooper did nothing once he was moved from the Browns to the Bills, essentially. Nothing that we could trust from a fantasy perspective. And look through the course of training camp, the pecking order, not including Brock Bowers at tight end here, was Jakobi Meyers, then Trey Tucker, then Thornton. Rookie Jack Besh has been basically invisible all offseason long, and Thornton, the other rookie who we're talking about here, became the target for Geno Smith throughout the course of training camp and preseason. Into the final preseason game with 3 targets, 2 catches, 26 receiving yards, and a touchdown. And Geno Smith has praised Thornton throughout the course of the offseason. So once again, what does all this exactly mean? I think the player with the most upside in terms of a Raiders wide receiver that you could go out and add, who could walk into decent volume on a week in, week out basis, is Thornton. He is the player that I'm going after. I've seen a lot of people go and pick up Amari Cooper. He is also sitting at exactly 29% rostered at the time I'm recording this. And I mean, I think it's fine, but I just feel like Cooper is going to end up being a roster clogger. I might be wrong about that, but I just don't feel like he has the same amount of upside. We've already seen the chemistry between Geno Smith and Thornton play out, as this slow rise of Thornton has been happening throughout the course of the entire off season. He's been on the team. He's, practiced with the playbook, with, everything that we want to see, right? And I just don't know if Amari Cooper is going to walk into an intense amount of wide receiver one volume right away. I think that if Jakobi Meyers truly gets traded, it impacts Thornton in the most positive direction. We will see how things shake out over the next couple weeks. But even if Jakobi Meyers does not get traded, Thornton, I think, has solidified himself into a specific role with the Raiders. He is the player that I would go out on the waivers to target right now, stash him, let this all play out, and ultimately, once again, I think he has easily the most upside of any Raiders wide receivers that you guys could potentially pick up before Week 1. Next up, let's talk about Isaac Teslaa of the Detroit Lions. Now, this is an exciting player, don't get me wrong. He's only sitting at 20% rostered. It's not the best matchup on the road here in Week 1 for the Lions, going up against the Packers, who gave up the 5th fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers last year. But I don't know. I mean, it's okay to look at last year's numbers as we approach Week 1 for, matchups and everything. But also, a lot changes in the offseason. And this is one of those teams when it comes to the Packers. I still think that they will have the ability to, cause some turnovers, have a decent defense, but let's face it, when it comes to wide receivers facing this Packers team is pretty depleted at the cornerback position, and that could certainly open up things for the Lions in Week 1, showcasing their new offense with no Ben Johnson. I think that the Lions are going to come out here and have a very good offensive day. And it's going to be tough to see this pecking order. We're going to see a lot of the run game between Gibbs and Monty. We're going to see a lot of J-Mo, Amon-Ra, and Sam Laporta. But you just look at the way that the preseason ended for a player like Teslaa. And ultimately, this is a player who's just exciting to go ahead and chase, especially if you have that extra roster room. And I have seen him added and even drafted in quite a few redraft leagues over the past couple days. And this is just one of those moments where there's a player, it feels special, it feels like he's going to fit right into the wide receiver 3 spot on a good offense. I know there's no more Ben Johnson at offensive coordinator, but the Lions are still going to be a very good offense this year. And ultimately, some of the losses they've suffered on the offensive line, it's going to be more difficult for this team to run the football. I think they will throw the football more this year than people are anticipating. They don't have the greatest matchup once again in week 2 at home against Chicago, but then they get Baltimore, Cleveland, and Cincinnati in 3 weeks straight. Another tough matchup against the Chiefs, but then week 7 they have Tampa Bay as well. So there's enough positive matchups before the week 8 bye that we could see some big plays out of this rookie wide receiver. So do I think like you're going to necessarily start him in week 1? No, but this is a player that is worth stashing, especially for you guys in deeper leagues. Another player worth stashing in deeper leagues and worth paying attention to in general is Malik Washington of the Miami Dolphins. Now, it's really easy to just feed right into preseason hype because we've been so deprived of the football season for so long now that we have nothing else to react to until week 1 actually starts. But Malik Washington, throughout the course of preseason and somewhat training camp, showed very good chemistry with quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, and then we saw that last preseason game for the Dolphins where he ended up having 3 targets, 41 total receiving yards off of 3 receptions, caught every target there, and scored a touchdown against the Jaguars, right? And here in week 1, it's a good matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, who allowed the 22nd most fantasy points last year to opposing wide receivers, and he's coming in at just 5% rostered at the time I am recording this. And now I will kind of ask yourself the question, where do you stand with Tyreek Hill, who still has not been practicing, dealing with that oblique injury? What is your concern level? Because some of you guys are really out on Tyreek Hill, right? And then how do you feel about Jalen Waddle, who was able to play in the preseason game, but who was also notoriously been off and on the injury report and even was recently on the injury report, right? And then, like, how is Darren Waller going to, come in here and replace Jonnu Smith, right? There's going to be some vacated targets here. We all know that. And then we're expecting a lot of those to go to Devon Achane, but although it's been reported he's facing no setbacks with that calf injury, he is dealing with a calf injury. So we know Malik Washington, fully healthy, was still a talented, rookie wide receiver last year. Just didn't really get the opportunity. But, in dynasty formats, best ball formats, this was a player that was talked about last preseason. And this may be a bit of a stretch. This may be one of the more deeper kind of reaches here on today's video for you guys in deeper formats. But keep an eye on Malik Washington. This is a great matchup in week 1, very lowly rostered, and could be a player if we do see some of these Dolphins wide receivers, cross your fingers we don't, as well as running backs, once again, crossing your fingers we don't see them go down. But if we do see injuries on this team, Malik Washington could be stepping into a much bigger role in 2025. Let's move to the running back position, and let's talk about rookie Woody Marks of the Houston Texans, getting a matchup on the road against the Rams in week 1, who allowed the 17th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. So kind of right there in the middle. Certainly not a bad matchup for the Texans running backs in week 1. But let's talk about the Texans running backs. We got the update today, at the time I'm recording this, that Joe Mixon's going to miss at least the first 4 games of the season. We also know that they have a tough matchup in week 5 against the Baltimore Ravens, much better against the run than against the pass, and then a bye week in week 6. So I think there's a very realistic possibility that Joe Mixon misses the first 6 weeks of the season through the bye week. And don't get me wrong, I think Nick Chubb can come in here and get the bulk of the carries, but I still think that the running back with the most upside on this team is Woody Marks. I know Dameon Pierce is still floating around as well, but Woody Marks comes in at just 16% rostered at the time I am recording this, and he is a player that you can go out and grab who has a lot of upside and could potentially even come in here and have a pass catching role, even if Nick Chubb or Dameon Pierce is seeing some of that more traditional 3-down back work or some of the goal line work. Woody Marks can still carve out a role and has still been a name in contention when we've talked about the Texans running backs throughout the course of the off season. So once again, what does this look like once Joe Mixon is back and, taking the bulk of the carries potentially? It's going to be tough to say. Do I think this is going to be a player who can step in and just be like a true RB1 for you? I don't quite know. It's a little bit of a murky situation, but I like the matchup enough in week 1. And while I don't like the Texans' offensive line, don't get me wrong, I still like this offense enough as a whole. I still believe in C.J. Stroud and the passing attack that I think Woody Marks can be enough involved potentially that he is worth stashing as we approach week 1. Moving to another rookie running back, that is Dylan Sampson of the Cleveland Browns, who gets a week 1 matchup against a very bad Cincinnati Bengals defense. But ultimately, the Bengals still came in 13th against the running back position in terms of fantasy points allowed last year, as atrocious as that defense was. Now, I know the Bengals finally went out and gave a pay raise, and they're going to Hendrickson. They're going to have him on the field at defensive end this year, but this Bengals defense is still awful at the end of the day. But don't get me wrong, this is still a very porous Cleveland Browns offense. We don't know exactly what to expect, but hey, they got Joe Flacco a quarterback. They do have playmakers like Jerry Jeudy and Njoku, Cedric Tillman even. They can get something going here. And I don't know at the time of recording this if we have any clarity whatsoever about the fellow rookie running back on this team, Quinton Junkins, and if he's even going to be able to play in week 1. And some of the latest news is that until the NFL completes their investigation on his off-the-field matter, that he's not going to be able to play, or the Browns may not even reach a deal with him until that's done. So it feels like Dylan Sampson's walking into potentially a lot of volume in week 1, because it also feels like the Browns just don't want to commit to Jerome Ford whatsoever. So even if Jerome Ford gets some of the carries, some of the touches in this game, Dylan Sampson has the profile to come in here and be a pass-catching back. And you could look at this two ways, right? Maybe the Browns struggle in this game, even in a decent matchup, to say the least, against the Bengals, but that would lead to maybe a lot of dump-offs, the Browns being forced to throw the football, which could be good for Dylan Sampson's profile. Or you can just look at it that the Bengals have a very bad defense, and that's going to open up opportunities at home in week 1 for the Browns. And if that happens for Dylan Sampson and he comes out of this game with a double-digit performance, even if it's, just between 10 and 15 points, I think he will certainly move up in roster percentage. At the time of recording this, sitting at 38% rostered. We can see that number slowly go up. Not a great matchup in week 2 against Baltimore, and they do face some other tough defenses like Detroit, Minnesota, and Pittsburgh, all within the first 6 weeks of the season. But if the opportunity is there, the player is always worth picking up. Remember, at the end of the day, volume is always key for the running back position. If Dylan Sampson is going to be walking into starting running back volume, whether if it's on the ground or through the air, he is worth picking up before week 1. And last but not least, let's talk about Chris Rodriguez of the Washington Commanders, sitting at 21% rostered at the time I am recording this. And listen, guys, there has been so much hype around the Washington Commanders backfield and so many ups and downs in like the past 5 days or whatever by the time this video comes out. And listen, I like JCM as much as the next guy. It was a little concerning that Bill rested in that last preseason game, nursing a shoulder injury, so keep that in mind. But listen, at the end of the day, when we look at JCM, when we look at Austin Eckler, and then we look at the odd man out in terms of fantasy players that have rostered percentages here, Chris Rodriguez, right? I think that Chris Rodriguez is being a little bit undervalued going into week 1, right? This is still a player who already has good rapport with the team, who got some opportunities last year, and that the Commanders like a lot, right? And I think at the end of the day, we're going to see a combination of JCM and Chris Rodriguez in what was Brian Robinson's role last year. And then Austin Eckler is going to have the exact same role he had last year, which was basically just in the receiving game, right? He will get some touches, don't get me wrong, but ultimately he's going to be used as the receiving back. Will not be surprised whatsoever in a great matchup against the New York Giants in week 1, who gave up the second most fantasy points second to last in the league last year against opposing running backs and fantasy points allowed. I will not be surprised if Chris Rodriguez stumbles into the end zone. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, this whole thesis could be somewhat wrong. I won't be surprised if JCM has a really good game. I won't be surprised if Eckler has a good game. I won't be surprised if Jaden Daniels takes all of the potential at the goal line away from these guys. But Chris Rodriguez is the lowest rostered Washington Commanders running back, and I think he is certainly worth adding, especially like what happens if in week 1 Chris Rodriguez sees 10 plus carries and JCM sees 5 to 6 carries. You know, like what happens if the overall thesis on JCM is just wrong? If you guys have the room on your benches, Chris Rodriguez is definitely worth stashing. What if he is the running back for the Commanders who ends up with the most volume and he's just sitting on your bench or sitting out there on waivers? You're going to feel very good if you went out and made that move, especially if you do it right now when nobody's really paying attention to Chris Rodriguez, it feels like. So ultimately, go out, do it now before week 1 is here, and I think that it could definitely pay off. That'll do it for today's video. There are the players that I am stashing off of the waiver wire before week 1 of the NFL season. If you guys are new here, this is all we do here all year long. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way out. More importantly, if you guys have any fantasy football questions whatsoever as we approach week 1, waiver wire additions, trades, roster reviews, start sits, whatever it is, drop them in the comment section. I will answer every single comment on today's video. Be sure to hit that like on the way out. Some of the other videos for week 1 on the playlist that will pop up on the screen any moment now. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.